Hello, my friends. So this is going to be the story of the King of the River. Not an especially long or complicated story, but a story about my favorite thing.
Consequences.
So, not long after the players arrive in ancient Rome and start to establish themselves there, get themselves set up in their bar and whatnot, they're given a little mission by Ganzorig, a little thing to look into. Ganzorig is the Highefer, which is basically the sheriff. He's the guy who's in charge of maintaining order and dealing with all the problems in the city. He's also the only Nagaraja in the city until the players arrive, because one of the players, Cassandra, is a Nagaraja. Now, the relationship that exists in the ancient world, as far as like the elder and younger members of the same clan, is a lot more strict and specific than what exists in like the modern knights. The elder of a clan has a lot more authority over the members of their own clan.
Listen, you little wiseacre. I'm smart, you're dumb. I'm big, you're little. I'm right, you're wrong. And there's nothing you can do about it.
They also have a lot more responsibility for them. If you remember the old video they did where they went and they were at Dracula's castle and one of the players messed up and accidentally killed one of Dracula's wives. Rather than Dracula punishing the players, he killed one of the NPCs with them because that NPC was the eldest of that group and therefore was considered responsible for their actions. This is more the old school way of doing things.
If you want to be old school about it, and you know I'm all about old school.
Sort of like if a little kid breaks something, you don't really expect the little kid to take responsibility. You assume that the parent will be the one who refuses to take responsibility for what they've done instead. But along with taking responsibility for things that the younglings do, you also get to boss them around a lot and do one of the most important jobs that all vampires engage in, which is assigning scut work to younger vampires.
Help with the wars and cover the ER.
The ER?
Lastly, we need to discuss the on-call rotation for the night shift.
I was kind of hoping.
Good, Carter. Thank you for volunteering. You can take the first shift starting tonight.
So in this case, Ganzorig assigns some scut work to Cassandra, which is he wants her to go look into some monster attacks that are happening by the river. Now, he tells her that probably this is nothing. There are often rumors of monster attacks by the river. It's usually just like someone got bitten by an eel, or somebody stabbed somebody, or just somebody drowned. But just in case, go look into it. Make sure there's no monster in the river, and just, if there is a monster, like, let me know, or kill it or something. Or if there's not, just be like, somebody drowned. This happens all the time. He's not super concerned. He has other more important things to worry about himself. This is just like, a little chore that she has to go do. So the players all head down to the river, which runs right, through the city. And they're hanging out there looking for this monster. They talk to a bunch of people, and they get a lot of conflicting reports. People telling them, like, oh yeah, a guy drowned, a guy was attacked by a sea monster, there was a giant snake, there was a hippogriff, or, various stories that don't really match up. So they're kind of unsure what exactly they're looking for. And so they decide, oh, you know what, let's do? Let's talk to the fish. Aquila has animalism. He's going to talk to fish.
It must be wonderful down there in your world.
Now, whenever players talk to animals, there's kind of a tightrope line you have to walk between. You don't want to make talking to animals completely useless, because believe me, like I've played a gangrel in a game where you're dealing with a game master who's like, animals just don't ever know anything. And you're like, well, cool, thank you for making my already useless discipline even more a waste of my time to put points into. But at the same time, you have to kind of judge it around, like, animals are animals. There's a limitation to how much stuff they're aware of, how much stuff they can remember, how even they can understand and interpret things. And fish in particular, not super bright. They're not as smart as like a dog. So what the information that they get from these fish is spotty. Basically what happens is the fish are trying to answer their questions to the best of their abilities. And in answering their questions, they tell them two things, which, because the fish are kind of derpy, and because the players were not super, super specific about how they asked questions. The players are unsure whether the fish are talking about two different things or the same thing. The fish tell them that there is a monster in the river that's been eating things, mostly fish. And they also refer to something that they call the king of the river.
Girls run and hide, brave men shiver. I'm Mike Fink, king of the river.
Which they describe as like, oh, a big monster that floats around the river and talks to us. Now the birds are describing two different things. Sorry, did I say birds? The fish are describing two different things. There were no birds involved in this. The fish are describing two different things. And the players were suspicious of that, but they weren't certain. And, you know, like I said, it's kind of hard to get really clear answers from fish. The players start getting caught up on this, and they're asking a lot of questions about the king of the river. The fish tell them that the king of the river is like a big cloud, a spooky monster that talks to them, that it and they describe it coming out of this main sewer exit that like where the Roman sewers exit out into the river, and that sewer exit is also right near the island, Tiber Island, where the elder Zemetes lives. So the players are pretty suspicious right away that they're talking about the Zemetes, right? They're talking about Gohar. He would have animalism, being a Zemetes, so and Zemetes can shift forms, so they're like, that's probably who they're talking about. And I kept trying to throw the players hints of like the monster is down there, like further down the river, right? I kept telling them this. I had the fish say this multiple times, but eventually you get to a point where the players are just kind of stuck on an idea. They're like, we have to figure out how to investigate this sewer, and we don't want to do it. We don't want to investigate the sewer. How will we do it? And I'm like, the monster's down there, not by the sewer. But how will we investigate the sewer? So you're just like, okay, clearly you guys are going to go investigate the sewer. So what do you want to do? They go get some chum, like in Jaws, and they're standing outside the sewer throwing fish guts and, you know, pig vomit and whatever into the water to try and attract this monster. They're like, we'll try and draw it in like a shark. They do this for a bit, and in the process of looking around, they run into a ghost. Cassandra has like shroud sight, so she sees a ghost. She's able to talk to this ghost, and from the ghost, which is the ghost of a little kid who drowned in the river, the ghost is also aware of like a creepy invisible creature that wanders around out of the sewers. And so again, they're like, ooh, that definitely sounds like a vampire. We're not sure which vampire. And they haven't been in the city very long, but I had them roll for like what things they've heard about the sewers, and they've picked up a couple things that they get with their rolls. That apparently the sewers are considered like neutral territory. They're not like not unlike in the modern nights where the sewers would almost always be assumed to be Nosferatu territory. The sewers in Rome are not considered Nosferatu territory. They're considered holy ground that is like off limits, which is based on historical truth. The ancient Romans considered their sewer system to be essentially like a church, a holy ground. It was sanctified by the gods, which might seem strange, but if you think about it, to the Romans, the sewer system was not only a miraculous thing, because something like that technologically didn't really exist anywhere else in the world, but also 100% crucial to their entire civilization, right? Like, they couldn't function without the sewer system. Not only was it necessary to drain the swamp out of their territory to build their city, but also a city that big without a sewer system is going to be a disaster. So it's a crucial part of the city, and they took it very seriously that this was like a divine engineered masterpiece, you know, we have to protect and keep sanctified. And so the vampires in this era see it the same way. And specifically, the vampire group known as the Horsemen.
We are wrestling's elite. We are the Four Horsemen. Woo!
Are supposedly in charge of protecting the sewer. Like, no one's allowed to live in the sewer, no one's allowed to hunt in the sewer. You're supposed to stay out of it and leave it alone. And the Horsemen are the ones who are charged with making sure no one bothers it. The players have heard some bad things about the Horsemen, which is purely just because the players have Ventru in their party and they don't have any La Sombra. So they've met a bunch of Ventru who don't get along with the Lasombra, and the Lasombra are all in the Horsemen, and so...
We know nothing about their language, their history, or what they look like, but we can assume this. They stand for everything we don't stand for. Also, they told me you guys look like dorks.
They look like dorks. Oh, I'm gonna...
They don't want to go into the sewer for a lot of reasons. Partially because of what they've heard, also because they don't know who's in there, also because they, I think, are still sort of partially shell-shocked from when they went into the sewers like 4 years ago in my old game and got attacked by a gigantic ghouled alligator. That they never really became comfy again with sewers after that. But they are throwing tons of garbage in the river trying to attract this monster. And eventually, Cassandra and Aquila are out here like with Auspex looking around, trying to, like, where is this monster? Is he sneaking up on us? And eventually they spot him. They spot a cloaked guy, like an invisible guy, moving along the bridge. And they watch him, and he creeps up and he starts talking to this ghost. And they're like, oh! He's talking to that ghost we were talking to. And then he like climbs up on top of the bridge. So Cassandra's like, I see it, and runs off to like run up the dock or whatever, up the pier and onto the street and onto the bridge and out onto the bridge. Aquila runs after her, even though Aquila failed his Auspex check, so he can't actually see anything. He's just following her because she says she sees something. And Lucretia is down by the river, just still throwing chicken livers in there. And right as they are running up to talk to this guy, the actual monster finally shows up. Now this creature, this monster, was supposed to be much further down the river, but it roams, and they've been out there for like an hour throwing guts in the river, so they've attracted a lot of attention from other birds and fish and whatnot. And this creature shows up, and it is actually a shark. This side quest was not intended to be anything complicated or dangerous. There literally is a bull shark that has swum from the Mediterranean up the Tiber River, which is a real thing. Sharks do that sometimes. Bull sharks can breathe fresh water, and so they will often swim up rivers. The Tiber's a pretty big river. Sometimes sharks will swim up it. And bull sharks are actually the most likely sharks to attack humans as well. Not like great whites or anything. But yeah, this bull shark has swum up the river, and it happened to attack a guy. People saw it, and being Romans who live inland, like, they don't immediately know necessarily what a shark looks like. They just see like some giant fish come out of the water and attack a guy, and they're like, oh shit, a sea monster, a big evil fish. And that's how the rumor gets started. Had they rolled really well on their streetwise checks, they probably would have run into a guy who was like a sailor who'd been like, oh yeah, I saw it, it was a shark. But they didn't roll that well. But yeah, it's not like a super dangerous thing. It's not very hard for people, especially vampires, to kill a shark. In fact, Lucretia kills it immediately. She sees it, and she just picks up a javelin and fucking like chucks a javelin right into the shark's head. She rolls a crit, hits it in the brain, and it immediately just flops over. You know, like in World of Warcraft when you kill something, like a shark or whatever, and the creature's hit points hit 0, and it immediately like leaps off the ground. It's like, ha! And it freezes and then just like rolls and flips over on its belly, and then you run up and you're like, now I'm gonna skin you. That's what happens. So she kills this shark, and she's like, I did it, guys. I beat the quest. I got him. But while she's doing that, Cassandra and Aquila have run up onto the bridge to talk to whatever is up there, invisible. Cassandra can see this guy with Auspex, and she says to him, like, hey, what are you doing? And when he notices he's been spotted, this guy drops Obfuscate. I describe it by saying, you see this guy, this old guy, he's completely naked except for this robe, which is like made out of some sort of heavy gold fabric, which is soaked. He has a bunch of like gold ornamentation stitched into the robe, and he's got a big amulet, and he's like dripping wet because he just crawled out of the river in the sewer, and he looks kind of emaciated and sickly, and he's just staring at you. And then I put out the token for this guy, and so this character, and I've talked about this character in another game. This is a character who originally, many years ago, I played in a vampire game which was run by Aquila. And then a few years later, when I ran a vampire game, I included this character as a minor NPC who showed up briefly in the game as like an Easter egg. But the history of this character is that he's supposed to be from ancient Rome. And since we're now playing a game in ancient Rome, I figured, well, he should show up again, right? And as soon as I put down the piece of character art for this guy, and the character art is Bill Nighy from Underworld. As soon as I put down the character art, the other players at the table who have been in those old games are like, oh shit, like fucking no. But the only person who's like there talking to him really is Cassandra, who wasn't in those old games. She's joined the group more recently, so she has no idea who. I mean, in character, none of them know who this guy is, but out of character, she doesn't know who this guy is either. This guy is Titus Anthemius. He is a super ancient Malkavian who is referred to a lot of times as the architect. He's responsible for building a lot of the ancient architecture of Rome, also responsible for building a lot of the ancient architecture of Old Constantinople, and at one point accidentally let a demon out of a jar and destroyed Constantinople, and then it also at one point, was at Dracula's wedding as, one of the guests. He was there at the reception. As soon as the players who recognize him see him, they immediately are like, we have to fucking get away. Like, just don't talk to him, just leave. Like, he's completely fucking crazy. He's the worst possible thing. He's one of the Game Master's old player characters. You'll never meet an NPC more insane and destructive than one of the Game Master's former player characters. Nothing but bad news. Just walk away. But Cassandra, who doesn't know this, and is the kind of character who doesn't really give a shit anyway. This guy comes out of cloak, and without saying anything, he holds out his hand, and he's got a giant fucking what do they call it? A big cameo ring, like a big signet ring, and he holds it out for them to kiss. Cassandra just refuses to do anything. Aquila, when he catches up, immediately is like, okay. I take his hand and I kiss the ring, like the Godfather. Cassandra will have none of that. And Anthemius gives her this very stern look, and he says to Aquila, you can always count on a child of Shalmace to show proper respect. And then just begawks at Cassandra. They ask him a couple of questions, which he doesn't really answer. He asks them what they're doing in his river. They say, we were trying to find this monster, and look, what do you know? There it is. We got it. So I guess we're done. It's been nice meeting you. We're gonna go now. We're just gonna go home. And they start to leave. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't really particularly care what they're doing, but he only showed up because they were throwing all this food in the water, and he was like, what the fuck is that? But then Cassandra decides to look back at him. They're walking away, and she looks back, and I can't remember what she did. She said she I don't know, flipped her hair at him or something, or she did something the equivalent of The guy's he's a Malkavian, and his derangement is megalomania. He's incredibly full of himself. Although it's not really technically true, he is under the impression that he is the lord of all he sees, that he built Rome from nothing, he created the city, he is the master and commander of all of Rome, that all other vampires hold allegiance to him. Most of the other vampires kind of ignore him, but they do it in a way that's respectful because he is very old and they don't want to antagonize him. He's kind of too crazy to actively do much, but he's crazy enough that if you're you're not really in charge, he might tear your head off. So you just yep, you're the guy, and just leave him alone. So he doesn't take this well. This little smirk, this little Valley Girl head flip, he doesn't like it. That's not his thing. And so I look at his powers and I'm like, okay. So I tell Cassandra, when you look back at him, he tries to dement you, so you need to roll to resist. And he tries to throw, I think it's called Mouth of Madness at her, and tell her, you desire to kneel and worship me. And tries to essentially dominate her. And she rolls and fucking resists. She might have also crit that roll, I can't remember. She resists dementation and just like no sells it, and then gives him another little smirk. I'm like, okay, well, now I have to roll a frenzy check, which he fucking fails. He then flies into a fucking psychotic rage and starts rushing, screaming at them across the bridge. And as he's rushing at them, they're like, oh shit. And then I tell them, because looking at his powers, I was like, oh, he actually has some abilities that I didn't even remember he has. Because he doesn't only have Malkavian abilities. He has a gangrel who is blood bonded to him. And because of that, he has learned some gangrel abilities as well. And so he starts like contorting his arms into giant fucking Lady Deathstrike claws.
I call it the Thinglonger.
And they're like, oh no. We run away. Like, we're just running as fast as we can. So they start booking it. Aquila, Cassandra, Lucretia, who's now holding a shark over her shoulder. He doesn't have like any celerity or anything, so he's not able to catch him. They outrun him, but they hear him like crash into some people like behind them, and like run into some guy, I assume some like ancient Romans carrying a pane of glass across the street that he crashes into, and he just goes berserk and kills these guys. And they hear like, you know, screaming and things being thrown around. They're like, oh, don't look back, just keep running, just look straight ahead and run, like Forrest Gump it down this alleyway and away from here. And they run straight to Genzorig's house. So good news, bad news. Good news is we did find that shark and we killed it. Bad news, we ran into this guy. We're not sure who he is. He was naked in a gold robe and he crawled out of the sewer. And then we kind of flipped him the bird. And he chased after us to the city and we think he killed a bunch of people. We're good though. Do you know who that was? And Genzorig's like, yeah, I do know who that was. That's the elder of Clan Malkavian. Why did you flip him the bird? They're like, look, it's not even proven that we did flip him the bird. We, as far as we're concerned, are mostly innocent of this. Genzorig tells them, okay, why don't you guys go home and stay there for a bit while I go find out how much of a problem this is for me. So they go home and immediately start packing, preparing to flee the city forever, assuming that this is probably what's going to end up happening. Now, the players have not been in the city long enough to really have much of a sense of like the political situation of what was going on, but what they gradually learn over time, this was actually one of the first times that they kind of became aware of this, and what is happening in the city is there are two major factions that are kind of competing for control of the city. One faction is called the Carni, because they mostly live on this in this neighborhood, the Carni, which is kind of like ancient Roman Beverly Hills. It's where the rich people live. And the other faction is the Horsemen. And these two factions, they have some ideological differences, but mostly the differences are that they just, you know, they both want to be in charge. Like they're not like radically different in terms of their objectives. They just want to be the ones who get to execute those objectives. And the Carni are largely a bunch of Ventru. There are also some Nosferatu and some Salubri in there, but like most of the Carni are these older Ventru people, and most of the Horsemen are these old Lasombra, although they have some other members as well, including Anthemius. A lot of the maneuvering that goes on between them has to do with how many votes they have in this Eternal Senate. The Eternal Senate is kind of like a Primogen Council, although it has more authority than a Primogen Council does. Kind of, it actually holds like official votes on things, and there is like a leader of the Eternal Senate, which at this point is Kolat of Ventru. But the Lasombra faction and the Ventru faction are kind of about equal in terms of how many votes they have. And so they're always trying to negotiate and maneuver to get like one more vote or one more position or one more like office assigned to one of their lackeys. One of these lackeys is the High Effer, who, like I said, is the sheriff. Unlike in modern nights where the sheriff is usually just appointed randomly by the prince, in this situation, the Senate actually votes on a high effer, so it isn't someone who just one person picks the sheriff. And the sheriff, Ganzorig, is basically a toady of the Ventru. He is friends with them, they boss him around. They're the ones who got him that position. And the La Sombra don't super like it, not because they really have any particular argument against Ganzorig, they just would rather have their toady be high effer. And since recently, some Ventru have died, and in the case of the really old Ventru, Tinia, who used to be in charge of the city, has disappeared. People think she's in Torpor somewhere. She went to sleep, as old vampires do. The Ventru don't have as many votes as they used to, and so while a few years back they had enough votes to put Ganzorig in that position, they don't have enough votes to put their own person in that position again. So the La Sombra really want an excuse to kick Ganzorig out so that they can vote in a new sheriff guy. And this is the excuse that they need, because he has, or his youngling has deeply offended Anthemius. Now Anthemius is demented enough that he probably doesn't even really hold on to this idea for very long, but the La Sombra really run with it, push a lot of political levers to get Ganzorig in trouble over this so that they can push him out. And all of this happens outside of the knowledge of the players because they don't have any characters who are plugged into this. But after hanging out in their house for a few days, packing their bug-out bags, eventually Camilla shows up, the other Ventru, to let them know that good news, everybody. Cassandra, you've been given a new job. You're now one of the Effers. You've been assigned by the new High Effer to be one of his deputies. And they're like, oh, the new High Effer? Who is the new High Effer? He's like, oh, Casca, who they've never heard of before, but who is a Bruja and also a member of the Horsemen. He's allied with these La Sombra guys. He's the guy who they have elected. And they're like, oh, cool. I'm sure he's nice. What happened to the old High Effer? And Camilla's like, oh, of course, he's dead.
Consequences.
Cassandra actually handled it very well in that she played it off with Camilla. They're like, oh, well, sucks to be him, I guess. Burp, burp. And then as soon as he left, she, just broke down, dry sobbing, because vampires don't actually cry, having some sort of emotional breakdown about having gotten this guy killed. The only guy who was at all nice to her or who made any effort to help her out at all. And she's pretty twisted up about it. After this, Cassandra is then sent over to work with the other Effers, one of whom is this gangrel, Ziggy, who is the blood-bonded slave of Anthemius, so who immediately hates her and wants to kill her. And they are all working for Casca, this extremely pretentious, extremely rude and dismissive Bruja who has no respect for any of them, no respect for the institutions of Rome, and is basically just, holding this position as a placeholder because his friends wanted to put someone there. Basically, the La Sombra who do we have who's a friend of ours who has a lot of potence and isn't doing anything? Casca. We'll make him the High Effer. He does not take it seriously at all, and immediately just starts shoving not only the scut work but all of the work off onto his underlings, including Cassandra. So, like I said, the story is about consequences. It can be fun to maybe possibly sort of flip the bird at an elder, but it could result in the only person who's been nice to you being killed, and then you being assigned a bullshit job where you now have to continuously throw yourself into danger as a reward for showing initiative in the way that you handled your interactions with said elder. A very, I don't know if iconic is the right word, but fundamental element of Vampire the Masquerade, which sometimes in games I've been in, they don't really seem to understand this, is that the job of sheriff, and especially the job of deputy, those are not jobs that you should be wanting. Those are punishments, right? Unless you're some sort of raging psycho, you don't want that job. That's a terrible job, right? That's the job where everything dangerous and annoying is now your responsibility. Every time something bad happens, you're the guy like, hey, look, you see that bad thing over there? You need to go fight it. And try not to die because your only options are leave, die, or win. That's it. So being assigned to the deputies is really a major fuck you. It's one of the worst things that the elder vampires can do to you, other than just like staking you and sticking you in a box for 100 years, is be like, good news, now you're in charge of dealing with every fucking piece of bullshit that no one wants to deal with. So moral of the story, always be super specific when you're talking to fish, and before you flip somebody the bird, try and find out roughly, who they are, because otherwise there might be consequences to your actions. That's it. That's the story. I hope that was entertaining, and thank you for watching.
He's gonna live forever, born to